The movie begins with Brian, an inventor who used to demonstrate numerous experiments, and his house situated at the top of a mountain where nobody ever came or went, meaning the place was entirely isolated. Since Brian used to live alone right from the beginning, he started doing extensive research for time pass and began working on all his inventions. Brian used to make many things that could be used in his daily life. He would go to different places, collected various items, and use his mind to create excellent devices. For example, after putting in a lot of effort, Brian converted a regular bicycle and a flying bicycle by attaching a band at the back with proper colors rotating along with the wheels. Additionally, he installed a clock at the top so that anyone flying it could check the time. After making the flying bicycle, Brian was testing it thoroughly to ensure it would work properly. Unfortunately, the sad part is that Brian hadn't completed his flying bicycle yet. During the testing of the flying bicycle, it caught fire completely, which made Brian very upset, but he never stopped experimenting and creating new things. He was constantly busy making even more new things. Now Brian started roaming around and searching for items and garbage bins. Then Brian found a mannequin in the garbage. Brian catch this mannequin with him, and after observing it, some thought started coming to his mind. Actually, Brian got an idea from it that he could make a robot. Brian started thinking a lot, because if he had a robot he could do many things that he did in his daily life. After planning everything, Brian went back home and started preparing a new type of robot with the help of the items collected so far. However, Brian had to put in a lot of effort and time was also running out, but he was completely involved in making that robot. After many days of hard work, Brian had finally prepared that robot. Although the robot wasn't very advanced, Brian had made it well, but the disappointing thing was that the robot wouldn't activate. Brian was trying every possible way to activate it and make his experiment successful, but even after so much effort none of his techniques worked. Brian was now really disappointed. Now Brian charges as robot and takes it to the market to sell it, but on the way he meets a lady named Emily who tells him about the upcoming festival. Emily said that during this festival all the people of the village would burn the thing that gave them very bad memories. After giving all the information about the festival, Emily left. Now as Brian walks home, he notices something big moving outside his house. When he goes to see, he is completely shocked because the big thing that was moving outside wasn't anything else but the robot made by Brian, which upon hearing the crackling lightning in the sky made Brian quite nervous. Brian was very happy to see the robot he had created suddenly activated, so now he quickly brought his robot inside the house. The next day when Brian woke up, he couldn't find his robot anywhere. Brian searched the entire house but couldn't find it. Then he went to the kitchen and found the robot therein. The robot's hand was an English dictionary which the robot had finished reading completely, and just one night Brian was so happy that the robot understood all of Brian's conversations and even replied. Brian was telling the robot that he had spent many hours making it, so the robot had to take care of itself. Brian had made the entire body of the robot from a washing machine that was already broken by Brian had made so many changes inside it that the robot was now activated. Brian, after thinking a lot, named the robot Charles. Charles the robot was also very happy to get his new name now. Brian started talking to Charles like a friend. Brian took Charles inside and outside the house, showing him his garden. Charles was seeing all these things for the first time and he was quite scared to see some crows flying fast above them. Charles was feeling that all these crows would harm him, but Brian reassured him that there was no need to fear. Charles had many strange questions in his mind and he asked Brian if the world was only this big. Brian replied that the world is much bigger than this, but Charles needed to be cautious and stay away from other people because it could be dangerous for him. So Brian told Charles that he couldn't go outside without his permission. Brian was treating Charles like a little child who had to take care of inside the house. Now here when it was night and Brian had gone into a deep sleep, Charles was still awake because he is a robot and robots don't sleep. Charles kept repeating continuously, I am sleeping, even though it was morning and Brian was going out for work. He had clearly told Charles not to leave the house until he returned. Although Charles agreed to Brian's words, he also wanted to go with Brian, staying at home with not at all pleasing to him. Brian had gone to the supermarket to bring some items where he started talking to a lady named Emily. They were discussing some festival and within a short time Brian returned home. When Charles saw Brian returning home, he became quite happy. Charles was so happy that he started jumping with joy. Charles' behavior seemed somewhat like a pet, as if he was happy to See his owner now here. Brian took a picture of him and he entire garden. Brian also appreciated Charles his artwork a lot, which made Charles very happy. As time passed, Charles and Brian had become quite good friends. They played different games together, spent time together and did many things together. Their bond had become like that of a father and son, but Charles was gradually realizing that Brian fell asleep deeply, so why couldn't he sleep as well? However, he stored all these questions and his memory. Now one day while Charles and Brian were watching TV together, Charles noticed a channel where a man was talking about a tourist place that was very famous and people from all over the country came to travel there. Charles was very impressed by seeing the scenes of that tourist place, so he told Brian that he also wanted to go to this good place. It's because Charles liked to explore a lot. Brian also didn't want to take Charles out into the outside world, and then the government officials capture him falsely claiming illegal experiments. Now Brian had gone to the supermarket as usual in the morning to buy some items. He was also taking some toys for Charles so that he could distract his mind, and after gathering the items, when Brian returned home he saw that Charles was not present anywhere inside the house. Brian was very scared, so he started looking around for Charles. But later he found out that Charles was going towards the back garden. Charles had put on some strange clothes on his body and he was continuously telling Brian that he wanted to explore that place. Brian refused Charles and quickly brought him inside the house, but after so long Charles had become quite angry with Brian. Even though Charles was a robot the way Brian had made him, perhaps he also had feelings now to make Charles feel better, right, and tells him that he will take him to town for exploration. Charles is very happy with the small gesture, and now while sitting in the car Charles says that he will sit in the front seat. However, Brian tells Charles to sit in the back seat, but Charles insists. Perhaps now Charles had also learned to be stubborn like kids, so Brian had to listen to him and let him sit in the front seat while he himself sat in the back seat. Charles says that he wants to go to the airport and the swimming pool where he enjoys a lot. Brian was quite poor and didn't have much money, so he tells Charles a white lie that all these things are not available here. No, after coming to his town, Brian tells Charles to stay in the car so that he can bring some stuff from outside, but at the same time Emily comes near the car who was talking to Charles. Charles also talks to Emily very nicely and he tells her that he is Brian's friend. After a while, when Brian arrives, he notices that Emily already knows about Charles, so while explaining to Emily, Brian says that no one else should know about Charles. Emily gets angry at Brian's words and now both of them take Charles and go to the riverside where there was a very nice view. Charles was enjoying all the things here a lot. We came to know that Brian and Emily liked each other very much, so spending time together was very good for them. Brian had already told Emily that whether she would like to go out with him on some other day. Emily happily agrees to Brian's offer, and then Brian sees that Charles is trying to go into the water happily, so he quickly goes to stop him, because if he went into the water then Charles could have experienced a short circuit in the systems present within him. After explaining this well to Brian, Charles agrees, and now they were heading towards home, sitting inside all three cars. On the way, Brian's neighbor, whose name is Eddie, was standing on the side with his daughters. Brian absolutely didn't want these people to know about Charles, so he hides Charles in any way possible, bringing him home from there. The next day Brian directly calls Emily because they had planned to go out within a short time. Emily's family also comes to Brian's house. Charles also wanted to go with them, so he followed them. Now a little arguments started between Charles and Brian because Charles wanted to travel around the world entirely, but Brian didn't have enough money to invest in Charles. While they were still talking, Brian's neighbor named Eddie came to that place with his daughters. The sad thing was that Eddie hadn't noticed Charles when he came near Brian. Eddie somehow didn't want Charles to be taken away by anyone else. All the people present at the festival were quite happy for Brian now, and now everyone knew about Charles as well, but they didn't say anything to anyone else. Now the next day Brian and Charles were sitting where Brian happily provides Charles with a ticket. Brian decides to stay with Emily forever, and with this decision are still. Thanks for watching.
Subscribe and press the bell so you don't miss any updates.